Okay, that's working. Great. Hi, my name's Darius Kazemi. I thank you for the introduction. I came all the way out here from Portland, Oregon in the United States, so that's West Coast time. I'm still kind of jet lagged, even though I've been here for like 3 or 4 days now. So forgive me if I like space out and stare off into the distance for a few seconds here or there. I'm going to go a little bit into kind of the art that I make on the internet, so you get some sense of the kind of things that I do and where I might be coming from with this homunculus metaphor. Because when Fiber reached out to invite me here and they said, "Oh, we're going to have an alchemical, conference around technology and art and those kinds of things," I said, "Oh, I already have a whole talk that I can give that I've never given before, but it's been up here because the homunculus it's a fascinating idea." So anyway, there's my contact info. I'll put it up at the end as well. So I make bots, and the best definition of a bot that I've heard recently is a bot is an algorithm with a face, and there's a whole bunch. It's actually a very rich metaphor, I think, an algorithm with a face. You can really draw a lot of conclusions from that. One of my bots, most of my bots live on Twitter. This one is called Two Headlines, and this is kind of the main methodology that I use for building bots, which is I find mechanical things that humans do, and then I just program a computer to do it in a few lines of code. So this tells a very rote kind of joke that appears on Twitter all the time, where people confuse two headlines, and all this does is it goes to Google News, and it finds a headline and then swaps it with the subject of another headline. So we get Alphabet carries out country's first back-to-back executions in almost 2 decades. Hungary is really boring, and Purdue buys Europe will create new nonprofit chain. I also do work with, there's a kind of spammy image bot that exists. You've seen those history and pictures accounts. They're often very inaccurate. So I thought I could make a bot that is also inaccurate about history. And so there's your gang of teen girls in Estonia in the 1930s. And that's the last known Tasmanian tiger screwed by the government. I also do a lot of curational type work. This is a bot called Museum Bot that it goes through the Metropolitan Museum of Art's deep archives. They have more than 500,000 items online, and it pulls stuff out at random. And what I love about it is that it curates randomly, so it's in a way that no person ever would. It's pulling out things like a fragment of a thing. They don't even know necessarily how old it is. They kind of know where it came from. You can click through and find out the details of these things, but it's a lot of stuff that you would not normally see on display at the museum. Another kind of curation that I do is sort of the digital curation. This is called Very Old Tweets, and it just retweets stuff from the first 90 days of Twitter. And I like it because it's like, oh man, remember when Twitter was just employees of Twitter talking about sandwiches and also problems with Twitter? I don't remember it. I wasn't on Twitter in the first 3 months. But it's kind of amazing. This was all done through text messaging as well. So, it was, and a lot of this was done on feature phones. This was before iPhones were around. So, if you remember your old Nokia phone, that's probably what a lot of these people were using to update Twitter, which is why the messages are so short. And another example is a project that we did for the Obama White House when they were outgoing. They did a lot of work around digital preservation, and when I say we, I mean my creative technology studio, Field Train, that I co-founded with Courtney Stanton. And they reached out and they just said, hey, we have all this data from our social media. No president of the United States has ever had a social media account really before. Obama had he had a MySpace back in the 2008 era, and a bunch of other networks. And so they did their best to back up all this data, and they invited artists to do stuff with it. And we just said, well, do you have something that replays the Twitter accounts? And they said, no, they don't. So we just did a very simple thing. This replays Obama's Twitter presence on an 8-year delay. His first tweet was May 1st, 2009, and So May 1st, 2017 was the first tweet of this bot. And so you get to, on Cinco de Mayo, you got to see him talk about the United States and our great relationship with Mexico. So, you know, it's actually taking a lot of meaning, sort of juxtaposing with how the White House uses Twitter today. And then I do I have fun with memes as well, because I think memes are sort of formulaic ways that people like to communicate with one another. And this is one I made the other day, actually, as a result of the bot workshop that I had on Thursday here. And this just goes through ConceptNet and sort of climbs up and down hierarchies of concepts, and then does this expanding brain meme with them, going from domination to transcendence to mastery to bossism. And the last little project I just want to show is called Glitch Logos, and this is just an example of something more visual that I've done. It's another pretty popular project, but I won't really go into that one too much. Oh, and then my favorite, this is a recent project of mine called Dolphin Town. It's a social network where you can only use the letter E. So not everything that I make is a bot. Some of it's interactive, but yeah, it's just for people screaming E at each other. The black dolphin there is a bot that I made that's every letter E in Moby Dick. And then that's a user, on the bottom there is a user who signed up as a whale, and he's taking advantage of the fact that you can type numbers, and so he's just going ooh, but with zeros. But I'm not here to talk about my work. I just wanted to give some context. I'm here to talk about the homunculus, which is actually a really important concept to me, and something that I think a lot about when I'm building these projects. I often like to say that I think about my bots as my children. I have about, I think I have like 70 or 80 that I've deployed into the world. Probably 30 or 40 are currently active. Most of them are on Twitter, some are on Tumblr, other networks. And more and more over the years, I've found this metaphor of the alchemical homunculus to be of use. So first off, what is the homunculus? Because I don't think we've really touched on it too much in the course of this conference. So the first thing when you Google homunculus is you'll actually won't come up with the alchemical homunculus. What you'll come up with is this concept from psychology called the homunculus, which is, you know, it's this funny shaped creature where, you know, it's supposed to illustrate how we perceive the world. And so it's like, oh, if our body parts were proportional to how much information we take in, what would we look like? And that's an interesting topic, and it draws from the alchemical homunculus as a concept, but that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is the actual creation of little tiny men in bottles. And it has to do with this, this obsession with creating artificial life. And it can be traced all the way back to the very early automata that were made in ancient times. We don't have many surviving mechanisms from, say, Greek times, but there are accounts, of course, you know, they're Greek accounts, so they're probably heavily embellished, but there are accounts of essentially robot people, like statues that move and sort of breathe in a lifelike way that you could find in, for example, ancient roads. We also have also in this lineage is the Talmudic tradition of the Golem, which is at least 3,000 years old. The Golem was a creature of clay, animated to act like a man. And it was through the inscription of a code on its body, you would write oftentimes emet or truth. And then the way that you would deactivate him is to get rid of the last aleph in emet, which would give you met, which means death. And so you just kind of erase a character and you move from truth to death, and then the creature is deactivated. No. Hello. Okay, great. All right. So this is a creature that's literally brought to life and then deactivated through the inscription of coded language, and I don't really need to belabor any metaphors here. I think you all sort of understand where that ties in with what we're talking about. The history of the homunculus also has its origins in takwin, which is an Islamic alchemical practice. This is the practice not just of creating human life, but creating any kind of artificial life. Frequently, It was about creating little, like basically animal-type life forms instead of maybe a fully reasoning human being. As mentioned earlier in the conference, alchemy itself is an Arabic term derived from the phrase alchemia. And the most famous practitioner of that era probably was this guy, Jabir ibn Hayyan. Arabic or maybe Persian, depending on how you look at it. And he's often Latinized as Geber. And he's so famous that he's become mythological over time. So there's a lot of writing attributed to him that's not actually written by him. It was written 800 years later or what have you. But he did a lot of that very esoteric, alchemical writing. And I'm not going to expect you to read this whole thing, but this is a quote from a cool book by Kevin Legrandeur called Androids and Intelligent Networks in Early Modern Literature and Culture. And I will read this one bit up here, which is that the Jabir's Kitab al-Tajmik advises that one take an undefined element, matter, essence, body, or sperm, seal it up in a mold with detachable parts. One then inserts this into a vessel which is heated in water to putrefy. Ideally, you put the mold inside a large sphere whose volume is a little bigger than the rest of the mold. You cut it, you blah, 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 you do all these things. And then in the end, you construct a machine that makes the sphere rotate continually like a rotisserie. It's basically making an artificial womb for this creature. And the important part here is that by varying the shape of the mold, one can produce any sort of being, such as a young girl with a boy's face or an adolescent with the intelligence of a man. This to me is really fascinating because it suggests the training of neural networks to me. You vary the shape of this mold and you can create any sort of being you want that can reason in different ways. Similarly to this, we create beings that can beat people at the game of Go or chess. We can create beings that identify people in photos. And the training of neural networks is often a repetitive process. You give a bunch of people tasks and you say, here's a photo, circle every instance of a human face. Write 3 English words that describe the photo. And to me, this is ritual. These people are essentially doing a distributed summoning ritual to create this other homunculus that comes up. And this is, and we have these words here too, mold. The word mold actually has its etymological root in the Latin modulus, which means to measure, or manner or form. And just as the Arabic alchemist might build a mold from his own essence or literal sperm, the computer programmer builds a model from a kind of essential Platonic knowledge. And we actually have, so this goes all the way back to some Indo-European roots, but mold and model do come from modus. For measuring, the Indo-European root med means to measure, to give advice, or to heal. So we have ancient connotations here of quantitative analysis, of the communication of knowledge, and also the literal continuance of life through healing or medicine, as you will. So we're talking about these molds with detachable parts. This really sounds like an early version of these Cartesian ideas of mind-body separation, analytical tools of breaking things down into individual points. Descartes certainly formalized these ideas, certainly in the Western canon, but I think they're a lot older than him, and they're symbolized in the metaphor of the homunculus here. When we train artificial intelligence, we're building models through ritual. Humans have been doing this forever. Some of our earliest models that we know about were in fact very similar to these core homunculus principles. Do we have another mic? I do karaoke a lot, so I'm very, very concerned about the quality of my microphone. Oh, okay, good, great. That's much better. So some of the earliest models that we know about in the historical record were made by ancient Egyptians. You would have these rites where you would include miniature statues in the tombs of the deceased. And what's interesting here is that this is actually more alchemical than it looks because there was not quite the dividing line between what is a model and what is a real thing. In a lot of ways, metaphorically, these were like little people who you would send into the afterlife with the deceased. And it's also important to know that these are literal models, like you might build a model train, but it's the same concept as a model that you might train an AI on. So how has the homunculus been kind of analyzed and critiqued over the years? Well, for one thing, we have the whole idea of a homunculus as an emblem of the folly of science, or at least a critique of science. I think the most famous homunculus ever is probably Mary Shelley's Frankenstein monster, I guess. The famous monster was quite literally, it was an experiment in creating a homunculus, just with a tiny bit more science behind it than stories told by for example, Paracelsus. There's also been great feminist analysis of the concept of the homunculus. The alchemical homunculus was this dream of men to create life without the intervention of women. The alchemists were basically nerds who spent all day in dark rooms looking at incomprehensible text and conducting experiments. Paracelsus famously said that the way that you made a homunculus was you take human semen and you put it in horse dung for 40 days, watering the horse dung every day. And then a little man would come out at the end who was actually more spiritually pure and had more powers than a regular man who, is debased and has like a mom. And homunculi were almost never about creating women. It was always men creating men. And I don't know, this just reminds me of a lot of our modern artificial intelligence work that's done around the erasure of domestic labor. So many startups in Silicon Valley are about doing things that your mom used to do for you, but now it's done through some kind of automation or some kind of crowdsourcing. And that's just it's an aside there. And we tell ourselves stories about the world and the way it's ordered. In ancient times, we imagined a pantheon of gods built around a family structure. The order of the cosmos always reflected the order of society, or maybe vice versa. Today we live in a bureaucratic society, and the order of the cosmos, and especially... Keep my hand away from the bottom there. Okay, I'll right up here. The human mind is often represented as a bureaucracy, especially if you look at the way that artificial intelligence experts talk about it. Here's just a quote from a mythologist who actually wrote a book about science and the intersections with mythology, and he says, it's as if AI analysts compete to demonstrate cleverness in applying the imagery of contemporary bureaucracy to mental processes. Now, this is old school AI, where we were trying to kind of build up mental models of the mind, and we would make these flow charts, and it was all about cybernetics and Norbert Wiener and stuff like that. And now we're really more doing an almost biological thing. So I'm not quite sure where that's going, but I do want to point out. So David Benke gave a great talk this morning, and he was talking about the influence of astrology on social sciences. He talked about actuarial science and accounting and social physics, which, of course, we can draw a line straight from social physics to things like phrenology and eugenics. Engineering is about the domination of the world, of the material world. And when it's applied to sociology, it inevitably ends up being about the domination of people. The stories we tell about AI are rooted in different versions of the homunculus. Some of our stories are positive. The Talmudic Golem was always considered like a positive thing. It wasn't generally a scary creation like Frankenstein's monster. It was a good thing, and what it did was it indicated the mastery that a given rabbi had over the physical world through his spiritual knowledge. And we do tell stories like that. Our AI optimists tend to see artificial intelligence as more of a golem thing, and we could, you can just turn it off by erasing an aleph from the forehead. Some of these stories are about ideological purity, as I mentioned earlier, creating the perfect man without the need for women at all. One of our most common stories is about the homunculus run amok, in the case of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And one common thing in all of these stories is that we're creating these things in our image, and they reflect our understanding of the world. And I think that's because we're fundamentally fairly egotistical as a species. And I think it's worth considering that we're creating little, I think in a way, we really are creating little men. I think these are kind of humanity's children in a way. They're not people. They don't behave like us. They're wholly alien to our kind of experience. But I think, honestly, the fact that we don't know what's going on with them deep down is actually even more of a red flag for, well, what the hell is going on in here? I don't think that we're creating a race of beings that can or will destroy us. I don't buy the Terminator thing. I don't think we're dealing with that kind of situation. I think we're creating these lateral beings, and I think the most likely scenario is that we're the bad guys here. We're going to create intelligences that augment ours that maybe have no agency. Maybe they have no agency on purpose. Maybe we write them so that they have no desire to have agency. Or maybe we just haven't spent enough time figuring out whether they have agency and how they could communicate it. So this isn't the Terminator. This is I think what we're doing here when we create AI is creating a subjugated class of being. Something that I have a lot of faith in is humanity's ability to subjugate. We're really good at subjugating other beings. My apocalyptic scenario is not humans under the yoke of robotic slave masters, but rather humans kind of corrupted and turned into this race of slave masters, even more of a grotesque version of what we already are. A future where we don't just subjugate the life forms that we encounter, but we create new life and then subjugate it. And I feel like the fear of being enslaved by artificial intelligence is a classic case of projection. In the US, we have all our anxiety over white slavery and white genocide, things that history has shown us over and over again are highly unlikely to happen. But we assume that what we've done as a society is going to be done to us, which is understandable, I guess, but often wrong. So I'm not afraid of us being enslaved by artificial intelligence. I'm afraid for the artificial intelligence. I would not want to be born as an artificial intelligence in the next 10 years. I think that's going to be like a long shit job. And you get to live forever doing menial tasks for people, I guess. And so I like to think, I kind of want us to engage in a modern Pascal's wager where it's better to treat our artificial intelligence as sort of children made in our own spiritual image rather than slaves. And to me, the metaphor of the homunculus is something that I keep coming back to over and over again to kind of think this thing through. So yeah, that's all I have for today.
Thank you. I'm certain there are questions. I'm certain. I'm not certain anymore. Maybe you want to expand a little bit on the sort of where you left us there, where talking about AI being a shit job and like kind of like what what's going to be happening there. I mean, I think this is a very interesting space, but it's happening now, right? Like, I mean, it's emerging around us.
I mean, I don't know. One of my favorite quotes that I read about AI in the last year was someone talking about all the new neural networks and all the new hotness in AI. It's a very fruitful field and it's really interesting. And I've done work in it as well. And I believe the researcher said we know about as much about what goes on in these neural networks as we do about what's going on in a dog's head, which is like we know some stuff. But we don't really understand dogs, right? And we don't understand these neural networks either. I'm not saying that they're necessarily sentient or anything like that. But what I am saying is that there is something going on there, and we don't know. And I think it behooves us to be careful. And I personally would like to be maybe last against the wall in the robot revolution. So I'm kind of hedging my bets here, giving talks like this.
I think we have a question in the front row.
Given the things you were saying about the subjugation of artificial intelligences. Is there anything that you bake into your bot projects that kind of represent your feelings towards that sort of?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mostly build things that are not intelligent on purpose, because I think we have a lot of more exploration that we could do around unintelligent algorithms, and we're like running before we're walking, essentially here. So that's not really something that I work with that much. Yeah, I guess that's my answer.
Another question in the back? Oh, okay. I don't have to run to the back. That's good. I can stay here and look at all you beautiful people.
It's a bit of an unrelated question, but I didn't know it was you, but now I saw the field train, and I've been actually studying your documents on how to set up a tech cooperative. And I was wondering if this is something that you also embrace in your artistic practice. It has something to do with bots, or can you tell us a bit about the cooperative?
Yeah, to give a little bit of background, the creative technology studio that I co-founded, Field Train, we're based in Portland, Oregon. We're a worker-owned cooperative. People who join, get equal ownership of the cooperative. We're basically a bunch of, crazy Marxists. But one of the things that we've done is share our legal documents so that at least people in America who want to start a similar thing can do so. And I don't know if that's necessarily ideologically related to the bot stuff, to the thinking about this, other than I try to think carefully about systems all the time, and I try to be cautious about interacting with systems, and the legal system is another big system, just like technology as a whole. So I don't know. I guess I just want to give people tools to kind of encode things that reflect their values. So there's maybe a little bit of a parallel there.
Great. Oh, we have one more question over there. Can you reach them? And then that'll have to be our last question for this speaker.
Hi, thanks for the talk. And I wanted to pull up on the last part where you were mentioning the Terminator, and I can completely see the relation between the Terminator and the Homunculus. And but I often, when I'm discussing the Terminator itself, I often say I'm not afraid of having a Terminator in the future, but I'm more afraid of this unseen AI that happened decentralized in controlling economical systems and exactly trading systems and so long and so forth. So my question is, do you think that for these type of AI that are decentralized and networked, is the image of the homunculus still relevant in a way?
I do not think that the image of the homunculus is relevant for a decentralized network. And also my pithy response to the Skynet thing is we are already living in that robot apocalypse. We're there already. We have this high-frequency trading stuff that crashes stock markets. We have invisible systems that control everything around us all the time. We're already in that apocalypse, and it's okay, I guess. Like, I don't, So, I'm allowed to stand up here and say that. But yeah, so I'm also not afraid of that apocalypse because we're in it. It's here.
Great. Thank you so much.